Hello and welcome back. We're now going to conclude, and this is part 3 of our lecture on communications and how culture can affect communications. We kind of left off here talking a little bit about Hofstede's culture, and we were talking about the different of these 5, the power, distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, avoidance, and long-term orientation. This is actually the way it relates with the United States. And then I took us over and started talking just briefly about Romania. And I was telling you a little bit about Romania, that I go over there quite a bit and I teach over there. And I'm always finding it's a little bit interesting because of the way the students are. And they have a very different culture, even though they are Europeans, but they're Eastern Europeans. And of course, this was the way we left off with Dracula's castle. Been there. I think he lived there for 14 days. Is actually not where Vlad Tepes lived. It's just a castle that's been related over to him because he would visit there, and I think the longest he ever lived there was actually 14 days. Now, here's a typical Romanian city. This is Brasov. This is kind of toward the eastern side of Romania, so it's a little bit more what we call the Slavic side. And remember, Romania was actually under the Soviet Union for many years. You look at it and you think this is the way actually that those Eastern European cities look. But in reality, here's a little better picture. Now, this is actually in Oradea, which is on the western side. And this is actually where I was teaching, not at this building, but the city I was teaching in. And this is a better example of, and I'm not sure what the airplane's doing there, but this is a better example of the way the people actually would live. Because the Soviet Union would build these large concrete complexes, and you would be assigned in one of the units, and this is where you were living. And you can see what's kind of interesting is some of them actually, because it would maybe only have 2 or 3 rooms into it, but if you had children, you would take your balcony, and you see how some of these balconies were actually closed in to make a 3rd room. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a house and not live in one of these major apartment complexes that have that Russian look about it or Soviet look about it, this would be the type of houses you would live in. Not particularly the best in the world, and you can see here kind of a little bit on the lower side of the way they're being built. Sometimes you would sit there and think that, these houses have been passed down from generation to generation. And of course, what were the people like there in Romania is kind of interesting. They do have cars on the left side here. You can see the car under the billboard, but then also you can see the cart being pulled by the horse. Aren't you happy to see that they have Michelin tires on that cart instead of wooden tires or wooden wheels? Here's a lady. This is kind of interesting. How old do you think this lady is? What do you think? 70-ish, maybe early 80s, maybe late 60s. Actually, she's probably barely 50. Yes, that's true. And the reason why is it's a very harsh climate and very difficult living styles there. A couple reasons. Number one is that the wind in the cold climate is very, very harsh, even though they're kind of south. That really beats up on you. And of course, a lot of people are in agriculture. They're outside a whole lot. But also the diet, because there's not a whole lot of the way of fruits and vegetables. And the reason why is that the Soviets, when they had Romania, there was a lot of mining in Romania for uranium. And if you know anything about radioactive materials, is they have to be disposed of very carefully, very, very deep into the ground where they're not going to leak out, because they have a half-life of 500,000 years or something, or 50,000 years. Unfortunately, the Soviets, when they had the materials that are radioactive, they were disposing of them in the water system. So it got throughout all the land as the lands are being irrigated. So therefore, they cannot really grow the fruits and the vegetables. So they primarily eat meat and potatoes, which is actually not bad for a very cold climate because you're getting your proteins and your carbs. But it also kind of takes an effect on you as the way you age. Now, this is Emmanuel University, or Università Emmanuel. This is the university I teach at, and this is, you're seeing one of their educational buildings and also their dormitory. And here's a picture of one of the classrooms. Now, what I want you to see here is Look how everyone's scrunched in there. You see there's basically, I see one girl, two girls in there. Well, there's actually more girls than that. But education is something that is not taken for granted, and they all will try to get in there because they know this is what it takes to get further ahead in life. This is actually the class I was teaching, and you don't really see me in this picture, but if you look at this, you can see that these are all Romanians. But like the student in the very front, he looks like he's a Russian sailor. But look at the guy to the far right in the purple shirt. He almost looks Indian, even though he was from Uzbekistan, I believe, or Albania, I'm sorry. Then go over to the other side, on the left side, I think I said left when I said right a while ago. The guy in the red jacket, he looks like he's German, and they're all Romanian. They just have different looks about them. Now, Romania is an area that has a lot of corruption. You can see, look at all these countries in the area of Eastern Europe. You see Romania has the largest corruption in both the government and in the business. Now, the reason why I told you that is to give you a little background about Romania, about that they're all different cultures there, even though they're all Romanians, but they all act alike. Very corrupt there. The students are very cautious because they know that they will not get ahead if they are corrupt. So they try to be very, very ethical in the way they operate, in the way they learn, and the way they move forward. So looking back at our little chart here from Hofstede, now I want you to take a look and look at that. Now I want you to take a look at Romania. This is the next chart. Now the power distance, where's that power distance, is very, very high, which means that some people have got it and some people don't. Individualism, very low, which means everything is done together. The masculinity is fairly low, which means that they're more feminine, more caring society. Remember that? These are the people who work to live. But the uncertainty avoidance is very high, which means they will not take chances. And you compare that now to the U.S. Now, once again, this is why Hofstede was sent over by IBM, because they couldn't figure out, here you got a office in Romania, but they don't work like we do over here. They do not, the U.S. managers do not understand why they cannot get the employees to work like we can. Well, look at this. They're almost polar opposites. Where we don't look at power distance, they do look at power distance. We're individualistic, they're collective. Now, let me give you an example of this real quickly. When I was teaching in Romania, and I gave them an exam, and I passed out the exam, so I said, okay, start taking the exam. About 2 minutes later, I looked up, and because I heard all this noise, and all these students, they got in little groups, and they were doing the exam together. And I said, whoa, students, wait, what are you doing? You're supposed to do this exam on your own. And they had this puzzled look on their face. I'm just like, why don't you understand this? I want to see what you know, not what your friends know. Well, I was talking later to the dean of the College of Business there, and he said, you have to tell them it's either an individual exam, otherwise it's a default over to we do everything collective. He said that's the reason why they got together, because everything is done collective. Interesting. You see why Hofstede had to kind of go in there and figure out, okay, individual compared to collective. Masculine, feminine, okay, we're a little bit more masculine, they're a little bit more feminine in terms of taking care of, but look at the uncertainty avoidance. And once again, very, very risk avoidant over there. One of the reasons why I think this is a little interesting is because when I talked to the Romanians, they've told me they've made every wrong decision in the wars that they could. World War I, they chose the wrong side. They chose the Germans to go with. World War II, they decided to choose, and they chose the Germans to go with. And after the war, they decided, well, we're going to go with the Russians. So they're sitting there saying, everybody we choose wrong. So very, very much so, we're scared to take risk because we're going to probably choose. Now, Hofstede didn't have anything about the long-term orientation for Romania. But let's go look now, and let's throw in Hungary. Now, if you know your geography, you have Romania, which is basically, if you think about this, you think where Russia is, south of Russia is Ukraine, south of there is Romania. Now, to the west of Romania is Hungary. If you go to the east of Romania, you hit the Black Sea, which is right above Turkey. So now we're going to go to the west. Romania is Eastern Europe, over there with Bulgaria, but Hungary is closer to Austria, and is considered Central Europe. So if you remember your history, you had the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Now, Hungary, if you look at them, they're right next to Romania, but look at the difference. In terms of power distance, they match the U.S. In terms of individualism, they match the U.S. In terms of masculinity, much more, even more than we are in the U.S. They are very concerned about being competitive, even more than we are. But when you look at the risk avoidance, they also try to avoid the risk. And for pretty much the same reason. They ended up with the Germans and the Russians. They typically make the wrong decisions. So you sit there and you think, here are two countries. They're both right next to each other. They both were under the Soviet rule, but they're so different. So just because a country is next to each other doesn't mean that the culture is going to be similar. Matter of fact, here's a case where they're almost polar opposites. Now let's add another one into it. Let's add the UK, United Kingdom. And this is interesting because United Kingdom now is in gold. So here we go again. The power distance, Romania way up there, but Hungary, the US, and UK, we're all down. Matter of fact, UK is lower than the rest of us. Once again, individualism. The UK is way up there. They're just up there with us on that one. And masculinity, they're up high. They're not as high as Hungary is, but they're a little bit higher than we are. And then on the risk avoidance, they're even lower. They take greater risk than we do in the U.S. So, and now, once again, here we can, without Romania, let's look at a long-term orientation. You sit there and say the UK has been around for a long time. Not really. The UK started with the Celts, and UK goes back to a little bit BC, before Christ. They were there, but not in many ways. It wasn't really organized. And so here you got a case where Hungary, which was a little bit older than the UK, they have a little bit more of a long-term, where the UK, because it's fairly recent, believe it or not, they have a short-term outlook on things. Let's add another group into it. Let's add the Russians into it. Now we got an interesting thing here. Power distance. Okay, very, very high on the power distance. Well, obviously, because what's happened here is that the Russians, they had the Tsar, and when they abdicated, the Tsar got out, they replaced him with the communist government, and you had Lenin, then you had Stalin, and Khrushchev and Brezhnev, anyhow, you know how it goes. So they always have a power player there, and today we have Putin, and so that's their power player. And then, so that's why they have a very big power distance in there. Individualism, they're not. They're very group-oriented. Why? Maybe the government's not group-oriented, but because the people have to band together to take care of each other, they're very, very collective, just like the Romanians. And once again, they're a very feminine society. You wouldn't think so, because you see these pictures of Vladimir Putin out there wrestling the bear and riding on the horse. But actually, they're a very caring society, because once again, as a collective society, if you're collective, you have more of a tendency to be feminine, to take care of each other. And look at this here about the risk avoidance. They do not want to take risks. Now, isn't that interesting? Because here you have a society that, is a very high power distance, has central control, but they're not wanting to take risk. If you remember your history about the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Russia was putting missiles in Cuba to attack the U.S. And at that time, our president was Kennedy, and he was kind of pushing back, saying, I don't think you're really going to do it. Well, actually, he was right, because he kind of got into a stalemate with them, and they took the bluff, and they pulled the missiles out. Now, not to say that the president or the chairman, whoever it is at Russia, wouldn't go out there on their own and do it, but the people as a whole, they are very risk avoidant. The last one we'll put up here for you is on Turkey. If you look at Turkey here, now Turkey is interesting because Turkey is kind of like all over the place. They're very collective, they're kind of mid on the power, they're kind of feminine, and they're very risk avoidant. Now, Turkey, if we had any data upon their long-term orientation, is a very, very old country. So they would probably be very long-term oriented. If I had one on China, they'll be very long-term oriented because they've been around forever. And so they have a lot of history. And when you have that much history, you're not very quick to turn. It's kind of like turning a big boat. Your changes are not as quick as they are someone like the U.S. or maybe the U.K. Now, the reason why this is important is because not only did Hofstede figure out that you've got to understand those different attributes when you're communicating, because you may be communicating with someone who is collective even though you're individualistic, or someone who comes from a very power distance culture where they take orders from the person on top. You don't go off and do things on your own. You're taking orders, or maybe they're very, risk avoidant, or maybe they're more the caring type of person. They work to live compared to living to work. So as you look at this map here, you can start seeing where the immigrants are coming from. They're moving around. A lot are coming from Asia, and a lot come from Central America. And there's a great deal that comes out of Europe too. These are where your immigrants are moving around from and where they're moving into. And if you look at what we think is going to happen by the year 2100, look at where you're seeing the population. You're seeing the greatest population is going to be there in Asia, followed by Africa, which is kind of unusual because come back over there and look at the year 2000. Look how small Africa was, but now we're seeing a very large population there that is going to be a migrant workforce. And then when you go up there and you start looking higher, Latin America, North America, Oceania, which is pretty much the Pacific, you start seeing that, those populations are shrinking. So this is kind of where things are going to. Now, just to kind of finish off here, I want to show you something a little bit interesting. This is what we call the Big Mac Index. And the Big Mac Index helps you to understand how things are valued. And this is kind of an easy cheating way to figure out how things are valued from one country to the next. And the way this works, the point of interest here, is that you look at the U.S., that's the gray bar, and if you were to buy a Big Mac, you spend $4.20. Now, how far does that $4.20 go in another country? So you go down to India, that Big Mac in India is going to cost $1.62. Compare up to the very top in Switzerland, that's Switzerland, followed by Norway, followed by Sweden, followed by Brazil, then Denmark. Look how expensive it is up there. Now, what this is telling you is that your dollars are worth more down in those bottom countries than it is in those top listed countries. So therefore, let's say you were given a job to go across and live in Norway, your money's not going to be worth as much there as it would be if they said we're going to put you over to India or Ukraine. But what's interesting to see also is that if you were to match this back to Hofstede, you would find out pretty quickly those bottom green countries down there are the ones that are more collective. They have a higher power distance. You find them also more caring and more feminine countries. So just something that's kind of interesting. So basically this is the end of the talk here. And once again, the point of this whole lecture is to help you to understand is that culture is very complicated. You're just talking about ethnic culture. And as a communicator, when you communicate, you need to realize people are hearing you say things different. One person may look at you as saying that you're the expert, we're going to believe you. Someone else says, no, power distance doesn't belong here. I'm not sure. You got to prove to me you're the expert. You got to have the credentials behind me. One person may sit there and say that, when you're talking about the importance of competition and the importance of capitalism, and they're coming from a feminist society, they may say, no, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to take care of people. So this is a way that you have to understand when you're communicating to a group of people, are they all your type of people, or is it a very, very big mix? I hope you've enjoyed the talk, the lecture, and of course, always feel free to do more research, and that's part of it, is that you can always go out there and Google things, communication, culture, you'd be amazed at what you'll find out. Once again, appreciate you coming and listening to us, and we will talk to you again soon.